Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another industry webinar brought to you by Tech Media, Control.com, and Universal Robots. My name is Jason Montgomery, and I'm the moderator for this session. Let me tell you a bit about our presenter and cover a few brief pieces of housekeeping before we start the session. Today's session is entitled The Cost of Not Automating Are Unresolved Business Challenges Killing Your Bottom Line. And today's presenter is Joe Campbell of Universal Robots. Joe is a longtime veteran of the robotics and automation industry. After executive assignments in sales, marketing, operations, and customer service with industry leading robot, system integrator, and engineering companies, Joe is now head of strategic marketing for Universal Robots. He's a graduate of the University of Cincinnati and is a regular speaker, lecturer, and author on manufacturing labor issues and the technology and economic benefits of robots and factory automation. Before I hand it off to Joe for the presentation, a few other notes. As always, attendees are welcome to submit questions to Joe and Universal Robots during this presentation. You'll see a spot on the right side of your screen where you can submit those questions. Questions submitted will receive a personalized answer after the webinar has completed. And thank you again for attending. With that, I'll hand it off to Joe for the presentation. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I hope you find this very informative and educational. Today, we're going to talk about a different look at justifying factory automation, in fact, a different view of automation investments on the whole. First, I think it's important to note that automation is really a driver of productivity in manufacturing. And that productivity expresses itself two different ways. The first is cost avoidance wins, where reduce labor cost, increase machine utilization, limit overtime, etc. The second area is in top line. This is top line revenue growth wins. And in this case, it's from increased capacity, new customers, and expanded product lines. And we're going to explore some of these topics later in this presentation. The real challenge is to connect an automation investment with the business challenge inside a manufacturing operation. And quite often, I'm fortunate enough to talk to CEOs and business owners and operators, and they don't recognize factory automation investments as a means to solve a business challenge that they're wrestling with. And we'll go through just a couple examples here to give you an idea. This is a common story that I hear, and that is customer is increasing their volume of orders to a manufacturer. Unfortunately, the manufacturer doesn't have sufficient capacity to meet the new volume requirements. And at that point, the business owner or operator or general manager is faced with a number of options. First of all, they could choose to do nothing and be unable to fill the customer's new requirements. Unfortunately, this will probably result in a new competitor being engaged by the customer, and so now the business operator is going to have to share their business volume with a competitor. The second option is to add overtime hours. Quick to do, very easy to turn on. However, it definitely increases costs and impacts the bottom line. Particularly difficult if the parts that are in question are fairly low margin. Adding overtime hours also over the long haul has a real negative impact on employee morale and personnel as the overtime hours really do start to wear. A third option might be to add a second shift. This is a big undertaking. Adding the second shift is not just a matter of hiring a couple people. It's actually being able to operate the whole facility safely during a second shift. And this, of course, is particularly difficult right now in today's labor environment where it's difficult to hire for the first shift, much less second shift. Option number 4 might be a plant expansion and purchase of new equipment to increase capacity. And of course, this comes at really significant capital investment and takes a significant amount of time to get underway and really enjoy the benefits of that new capacity. Option number 5 is automation. The business owner or operator could add automation to the particular machines, machine tools, or cells that they're trying to increase capacity from, and extend the workday by adding unmanned production hours on each of those machines. This can be a really significant increase in output and a really significant increase in both top line and bottom line performance. Another situation that we see quite often is that the owner or operator of a business has a new competitor who is entering into the space and is trying to take business, and they're doing so with low bids. Of course, this puts a real significant challenge on an existing business because they may be, in fact, paying overtime to make the current volumes work, and their P&L just cannot take the reduced volume. So again, you're faced with a couple different options. Option one is to do nothing, in which case you continue to lose bids to this new competitor. Option number two would be to add more machines and increase the staff to reduce the overtime that is currently being paid. And that comes at significant capital cost and takes quite a bit of time to employ. Option number three, which is rather radical, but in some cases, companies will outsource work to another shop. And of course, that just strips all the margin out of the business. And again, option number four is automation, perhaps to add unmanned production hours on a daily basis to the current machine shop. Another common story, labor costs are out of control, turnover is very high. Companies are spending a really significant amount of money recruiting and training new hires, and we'll talk about what some of those costs actually look like. Workers' comp insurance rates are going through the roof, and that's very common when new hires are brought into a manufacturing plant. And of course, quality is suffering because there's never enough time to do sufficient training. So these are common business challenges that are realized by manufacturers of all types and all sizes. And fortunately, factory automation can be a resolution to these challenges. The trick is to make sure that we can connect the benefits, top line and bottom line benefits from an automation investment to meet these business challenges. And again, we talked about some of these, but labor shortage is a very common situation right now. It really shows up as far as underutilized machines, machine tools, job satisfaction, which drives employee turnover. Quite often we still see employees that are being asked to execute dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks. A significant overtime, which reduces margin and impacts employee satisfaction. No ability to grow because of a limited manufacturing capacity. And of course, for most of us, we realize that a healthy business is a business that is growing. Limited capital to buy additional machines or do expansions. Perhaps quality issues, customer back charges are killing margins. And finally, scrap and rework costs. So these are common business challenges that automation can help impact. Which brings us around to justifying automation and actually putting together a proposal for an automation investment that can be presented to the ownership or business operations lead of a given company to help them make that capital investment. Now, back when I started selling factory automation back in the 70s, justification for capital expenditures was primarily driven by labor reduction. The whole game was to get labor costs down. Secondary benefits were understood, but they were rarely counted in the ROI calculations. And I'm talking benefits like improved quality or better yields. Today, it's a very different landscape in factory automation justification. Today, justifying capital expenditures are very closely tied to business operations. Smart automation investments are actually delivering one-year ROI on a very routine basis. Now, to help understand this process and to help put some of the pieces in place, we've developed a justification worksheet in a white paper to help justify factory automation. We've identified 10 categories of both top line and bottom line improvements, talked about multiple ways to measure these improvements and recommendations on where to find the information in every company needed to make these calculations. If you're interested in having a copy of this, I'd be happy to send it to you. Just email me directly at joca, Joca, at universal-robots.com, and I'll happily send you a copy. So how to get started? First step is to do some upfront research. All businesses run on some key operating indicators, and that's what you want to go look for. Try to understand the volumes and unit cost and margins and the growth projections for the given product line you're trying to automate. Look for cost of quality and warranty and scrap and standard labor hours and overtime, etc. And as we go through each one of these calculations, I will tell you where to find this information. The first and most obvious is direct labor savings. And this can be calculated either on an annual labor savings or standard unit labor cost, which is the labor required on a per unit basis to actually do the process. The information can be found both in manufacturing and in human resources. And I always recommend that you use burden cost, which is direct wages plus benefits. If you can't determine your company's benefit model, the good default is to use direct labor cost plus 27.5% for benefits. Right? And so this is the most simple and fundamental calculation is labor savings. The second is rework savings. Rework refers to the cost of quality issues that can be rectified with additional manufacturing labor or other manufacturing costs. Rework costs can typically be found in the manufacturing department and or the quality department. They can be calculated either on a per hour basis or a reduction of the overall rework cost. And this is really going to depend on how your company does the calculation and accounting. Scrap savings represent the cost of quality issues that cannot be reworked, where the part failure is too severe or the damage is too severe. And in this case, the challenge is to capture the manufacturing value, raw material cost and value added costs up to that point in the process. And once again, this can be calculated on a per unit cost basis or an overall improvement basis. The information can be also found in manufacturing and quality. Warranty savings really represent the cost of quality issues that actually got out of the plant and resulted in failures after the sale out in the field. These can be calculated on a per unit basis or a total cost basis. This information will usually be found in the quality department and customer service department. These are both key metrics. Inventory savings refer to the carrying cost as the total of all expenses related to storing goods, either work in process or finished goods. A general rule of thumb is that carrying cost will be between 20 and 30% of the total inventory value. So again, if you have $1 million inventory, the expectation is the cost of holding that inventory will be $200,000 to $300,000 per year. This information can be found in manufacturing and supply chain. Floor space savings may be a helpful calculation, particularly where manufacturing floor space is very expensive. I think two good examples are semiconductor clean rooms or automotive body shops, or any operation where space is extremely limited and expansion is difficult. Other thing to remember is sometimes floor space savings are tied to tax incentives and other business operating model improvements. They can be found in manufacturing in the facilities department. And if your company doesn't calculate the cost per square foot for their operation, you can actually go to a reference site called BOMA, the Building Owners and Operators Association, and use their fundamental calculations. Now we move over to the top line. Let's talk about customer retention. Losing a customer due to quality or capacity challenges means you have to replace that customer with significant volume to meet what was lost. And it's well understood that new customers are always more expensive to develop than maintaining a current customer. A rule of thumb in the industry is that customer acquisition costs are about 5 to 7 times customer retention costs. And this type of information can be found from the sales department. Insurance savings refers to both the reduction in workers' comp insurance cost and claims, warranty claims, or workers' compensation claims. The average cost of workers' comp insurance is between 57 cents and $2.47 per hour. It's based on the location and the job classification and the history of the individual plant. Workers' compensation claims average about $42,000 each. The information for your company will likely be found in both manufacturing or human resources. And these can be calculated either on a cost per claim savings or an average labor hour cost reduction. Employee retention savings are also quite significant. Those of you who are hiring managers know how difficult it is to hire right now and how expensive it is to bring new people into the organization and train them. Automation and improvements in the work environment can really reduce turnover. The average cost to hire is $4,100, and the average cost to train is about $1,250. And you should capture both. This information will likely be found in the Human Resources Department. Now let's go through some final steps. So you've got buy-in from the impacted departments. You've calculated the first year benefits. You've adjusted those to your company's fiscal year if it's required, and you've looked ahead for 2 to 3 years to see what the eventual buildup of savings will be. And what are the next steps? Well, now we're going to take that whole package and go to the finance and accounting department. That package will include the project summary and a budget, a manpower plan, perhaps an RFP, if there's an integrator involved who's been selected, a timeline, and of course the justification worksheet and the project savings. Now, before you go to finance and accounting, you may actually spend time with the company owner or general manager to see what kind of a fit this has with their expectations and strategy. And we'll take a look at how you can measure the return on these investments in factory automation. The most straightforward measure is called simple payback, and it's just the length of time required to recoup the cost of the initial investment. It's the ratio of the initial investment to the annual savings generated over the recovery period. It is a simple measure. It's very easy to run, very easy to calculate, but it does not take into account long-term cash flows or the cost of capital. So it really doesn't measure the overall profitability of a project. Another type of measure is called the internal rate of return, or IRR. It's also sometimes known as the dollar-weighted rate of return. And it actually measures or computes an interest rate that the project investment returns by comparing the present value of the cash flows from the project against the initial investment. The third measure is return on assets. And that's really a measure of how efficiently the company's assets are deployed. Return on assets measures the after-tax earnings relative to the balance sheet fixed assets. The higher the ratio, the greater the return on assets. This is particularly helpful for companies that are very, very capital intensive and have large manufacturing infrastructure to support. Another investment or measurement that is picking up a lot of interest right now is called OEE, Overall Equipment Effectiveness. And it's basically a measure of how well the equipment in your manufacturing plant, your factory, is utilized versus its maximum potential. 100% AE would say that the equipment is always available, it always produces the maximum parts per hour, and it always produces good parts. And we know that's not all going to be the case very often. Typical OEE is about 60 to 70%, and world class is 85% and up. This is a very helpful tool for companies that have complex capital structures on the manufacturing floor. A sister measure is OLE, which refers to overall labor effectiveness. And it measures how well labor is utilized versus the maximum labor capacity. 100% OLE would indicate no unscheduled breaks, nobody gets tired, there's no distractions, no quality failures, and every shift delivers its full production potential. Again, not particularly common in the manufacturing world, but a very valuable measure. Now let's take a look at a couple application examples from real customer case studies and take a look at how they used automation to solve a business problem. All Access Machining is a small contract machine shop and fabricator outside Dallas. During the COVID crisis, they struggled to socially distance their shop floor labor and keep the tools running, and they were not able to do so very well. So unfortunately, they were actually turning down orders based to the COVID exposure and potential exposure, and it had really reduced their capacity. They had downtime and very low utilization on their machine tools. They ultimately deployed 8 UR10 cobots for machine tending tasks. The cobots actually enabled fewer people to be on the manufacturing floor while at the same time increasing their productivity. The company now runs 3 shifts plus a weekend shift. And in all cases, the third shift is unmanned lights out production. They've actually lowered their operating cost and they have more manufacturing hours available to meet customer demand. Machine utilization is up and productivity is up. The increased capacity is actually allowing them to grow their business during these challenging times, and they have really seen a direct drop to the bottom line. A quote from the owner is, "I should have done this sooner," because he's really seen a different look at the business and a reshaping of the business and really significant improvements in performance. Another interesting example comes from customer MT Solar. MT Solar builds solar panel mounting structures, both large and small. They have a very wide range of parts. They are truly a high mix, low volume operation. And some of the parts are extremely simple, and of course, some are very complex. With the growth of solar, particularly in the western regions, they saw a 300% surge in demand, and consequently, they were losing orders and they were delaying shipments and not doing a good job on customer satisfaction. It was compounded by their location in Montana being particularly short of skilled welders. It was very difficult to attract welders into their operation. The high mix, low volume grind actually very much limited job satisfaction. And what they noticed was a real drop off in quality from manual welding of small but simple volume parts. The solution, they installed a UR10 based welding cell from our partner Vectus Automation. And within 4 hours of delivery, they were actually doing production welding. They reported a fairly straightforward 18-month return on investment, but more importantly, they reported intangible gains in employee morale and customer interest. Quality was up, reduced scrap was down, and even on the small, high volume, low complexity parts. The surprise benefit was that the reduced lot sizes, due to the easy setup of the cobot, allowed them to build smaller lots and reduce their warehouse requirements. MT Solar was at a point where they were prepared to make a significant investment in new warehouse facilities. And this new manufacturing model facilitated by the cobot automation changed that entire model and helped them avoid that investment. A very different direction, B. Looney is a UK manufacturer, and they make promotional products of all different types, flags and balloons and bunting and signs. And as you might expect, they had very, very heavy offshore competition. They really had to automate to maintain a competitive position in the market. And of course, their expanding market demands, their customer base was growing, but their labor costs were growing very, very fast, and they were having a great deal of difficulty hiring people. Their priorities were flexibility and scalability because they had such a wide product range. They actually deployed multiple cobots to support manual operations. The UR3 cobots carried out such simple tasks as blowing up balloons and sewing bunting and assembling flags that were used to highlight different food products and food offers. They had a really significant jump in productivity and a payback of just 9 months for the initial cobot investment, and it helped them regain their competitive market share. Another good example is Sanofi. This is one of the leading healthcare companies based in the world, but based in France. They have over 100,000 employees. They embarked on a project to improve the production performance to optimize packing lines. Right, that was their first focus. And they picked this particular area of focus because of really significant challenges in staffing. They had ongoing labor shortages. Their goal was to reduce manual processes and the physical workload on operators, but the real challenge in this was a huge mix of packaging sizes and weights. Again, they really turned themselves into a high volume, high mix operation. The solution, they actually deployed 7 UR10 cobot palletizing cells in one of their plants into the end of the packing lines. It not only met their productivity requirements, but it really reduced the physical load on operators and improved productivity across the board with really significant improvement in the manufacturing labor. They reported a 10% productivity gains across all packaging line operations, which is really significant. That's the end of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. You can feel free to reach out to me directly. My cell phone and email are shown here. And again, I'd be happy to send you a copy of the ROI calculator worksheet and the ROI white paper. Thanks again for this opportunity to talk with you today about justifying automation and the business challenges thereof. My name is Joe Campbell from Universal Robots. Thanks again.
Thank you, Joe, for this excellent presentation. Everyone, this is Jason Montgomery here to close out the session with you. A reminder to everyone in attendance, any submitted questions will be answered by Universal Robots following the conclusion of this webinar session. If you're watching this on demand, you can still submit questions through your computer, and we'll make sure that Universal Robots gets your questions as well. As we're closing out here, I want to thank Joe Campbell, Universal Robots, and of course, everyone who joined us live for this webinar today. We appreciate your time and hope to see you at another session soon. In just a moment, we'll be ending the session, and you'll be redirected to Universal Robots' author page on control.com. And we encourage you to look at their previous webinar that was also done for the Control audience. Until next time, I've been your moderator, Jason Montgomery, and we look forward to seeing you at another live session again sometime soon.